Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher, Adam Kaplan today. Mosher's in the house. Kaplan yesterday, good conversation with him. We kind of reset some things on defense, some defensive stuff today. Marcus Mariota's in the house today as well as he met with the Philly media. We got all that and more. Geoff Mosher from InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast joins us now on Football at 4. Geoff Mosher, what's up, my man?
Mike Gill, what's going on with you?
All is well, brother. We've got, Joey Porter Jr. Looks like he's going to be meeting with the Eagles on a visit, that according to some reports out there. I mean, I'm interested from you, Penn State guy. Number 10, is that a little high for Joey Porter Jr.? Give me a read on what a visit means from a player like Joey Porter Jr.
Yeah, so Joey Porter Jr. is he's interesting because there are some people who I've spoken to who think he'll be the first cornerback taken in the draft, anywhere between maybe 6 and 10. And there are some other people I think too that I speak to that don't think he'll go that high, but believe he is a mid to late first rounder. So you know how cornerbacks are, Mike? They come in different shapes and sizes, and they're also some are great for zone schemes, some are great for man schemes. So it's always hard to find that guy unless it's Sauce Gardner, who last year was just the elite of the elite, the cream of the crop. No one's going to argue. No one's going to nitpick. And amazingly, he wasn't even the first corner taken because for whatever reason, the Texans went with Stingley. But you saw the kind of success that Gardner had. I think he was all pro as a rookie. He was clearly head and shoulders above everybody else. But this year's class, you've got a guy like Devin Witherspoon who's only 5'10", 180, might just be a slot or a slot/outside guy, smaller. You've got Christian Gonzalez, who has a lot of great traits, but not always maybe the most aggressive corner, although he is very good. And then a guy like Joe Porter Jr., who is a very physical corner, Mike, and that shouldn't surprise anybody because his father, Joey Porter Sr., was a linebacker for the Steelers for a long time and a very, very physical one and known for being a little bit of a strange bird at sometimes. But Joey Porter Jr., very physical, very handsy, which some people will interpret as that might not translate so great originally into the NFL, but physical and big, 6'2", over 200. So he definitely has the size, speed, weight, length requirements that a lot of teams look for because you've seen in the NFL over the last 10 years, the receivers, they're not getting any shorter, but they're staying as fast as they've always been. Yeah. So you really need guys with size and speed to play that outside position, and he has that.
A couple things. Number one, on Joey Porter, you mentioned his famous father, linebacker. How much do you put into bloodline? Like, is that something that you're like, hey, he's got the bloodline that ranks him above some of the other guys? We've seen Horn, we've seen Patrick Surtain, we saw Asante Samuel Jr. Those guys have all translated well. So is that something for you that, tips scales at all?
Yeah, it's hit or miss. I think there are often times where you refer to, like when we talk about Jalen Hurts being the son of a coach, right? If you're the son of a coach or the son of a professional football player, oftentimes there's a perception, and many times it's accurate, that you're a little bit ahead of the game mentally. You've been around the game longer. You might be technically sound more so than a raw prospect whose father or mother did not play professional sports. So it's not always apples to apples. I'm sure somebody would love to jump into this conversation and say, what about Jalen Reagor? His father was a very good defensive lineman. He has not necessarily been the best wide receiver yet, obviously. So it's not 100%, but when you talk to people in the NFL, they absolutely usually like good NFL bloodlines because they feel sure that there are some advantages to that.
Yesterday, we talked about, the Eagles brought back their two corners. They paid money for Bradbury. They paid money for Slay. They have Maddox. They don't have a lot behind them. So how realistic, Moshe, to you is it that they would use a top 10 pick or the 10th pick on a corner?
The Eagles have shown they're not afraid to take players that they don't expect to be starters year one. Jordan Davis is an example. Landon Dickerson as a second-round pick. A good example, Andre Dillard a few years ago. Good example. Most of these examples that I can give you are guys who are linemen, though, and that's a priority position for them. Cornerback has not been as much of a priority, but like we say all this, it's not like they view it as safety, right? They think cornerback is very important. They've just really missed badly on the position a lot over the last 20 years in the draft. So I've said, and this is my opinion, I think, this team takes a lot of what it learned from the early Andy Reid era, especially with defensive linemen. But in cornerbacks, they had Bobby, right? And they had Troy. And they were smart enough to draft Lito and Sheldon before Bobby and Troy were just outright done. So they were able to ease Lito and Sheldon in that regard. And I think Lito played immediately maybe as a nickel or as a third corner, and Sheldon maybe had to wait like a year before he got on, but they wound up being a very good the best tandem the Eagles have had since last year. And there's a long time in between. So I would not rule out, because Howie Roseman came up through that era and is now in charge, I would not rule out them taking a cornerback in the first round, knowing that they have two starters already. I wouldn't pin it as the likeliest scenario, but if they truly are best player available, like they say they are, and there's a great corner there at 10, and that's, an area that they see as a long-term projection of a Pro Bowl player, then I would imagine they would take that guy if there's not somebody else ranked higher at a priority position.
In your mind, we talked about this earlier. Last year, Jordan Davis, 13, wasn't an impactful day one player. How important is it to them in their philosophy, maybe, that pick 10, if they do end up drafting pick 10, is a day one type of starter?
I mean, it's not vital. It's not vital. And the reason why it's not vital is because the way they put together their roster, they try to make sure that they're not relying on a rookie to be the be-all, end-all, or a first-round pick, because they know that it doesn't always work out that way. Now, when they take a guy in the first round, they do want to get that guy on the field, and I'm sure they were hoping to get more out of Jordan Davis in year one than they got. But they also understand there's development, and that is why they make certain moves in the offseason to fortify themselves with 1-year veterans or 2-year veterans to make sure that if their first-round pick is not ready, that they have a plan B.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of teams, like the fan base anyway, they want that guy to play right away, right? Devonta Smith at pick 10, he was a day one player and probably their best wide receiver. Jordan Davis at 13 was kind of a rotational player. Juergens had zero impact last year. Nakobe Dean had probably less impact. So they got nothing from really, I don't say nothing, but very minimal output from their first three. You wonder if they can afford to have that happen again based on the losses they had this year in free agency and where specifically that defense stands right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on what we're talking about. If let's say they take a defensive tackle in the first round, all right? Again, he may not be expected to start right away, but there's obviously area for a defensive tackle to get on the football field if that tackle shows that he can hold his own and play. I feel pretty confident in saying that they were hoping to get more out of Jordan Davis last year, than what they got. They can say what they want, but I mean, I know that they knew he came with challenges. Yeah, he did get hurt, but it's not like he was playing great before he got hurt, and it's not like you could play him a whole lot. You had to kind of reserve him for 3 to 5 snap bursts, because once you started playing him too many snaps in a row is when the conditioning and kicked in, and like the playing high and the leverage and things like that.
Is he a guy? Is he a guy that you have some questions about moving forward? About
no
what?
Doubt.
Yeah,
I had questions when they drafted him. I thought it was a good pick. I didn't say it was a bad pick. I thought it made sense. But one thing we harped on a lot was that he only played something like 20 snaps per game at Georgia, which is not a whole lot. And a lot of people wanted to say, oh, that's just because it was such a great defensive line and depth. And, well, great players play, no matter how good your defensive line is. And, Georgia's not dumb. They don't try not to play good players. That's why they're 2-time national champions. They play guys when they're supposed to be played. And Jordan Davis showed that he could only play a certain amount. And we knew that there were times where he was at Georgia where his weight fluctuated a lot, and they would have to manage that. So to expect that he was going to walk onto an NFL field and play more when he couldn't even play more than 20 snaps on average in a college game would be kind of unrealistic. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure the Eagles expected a little bit of a learning curve, and getting him on the field would not be easy. But I would think that they had hoped by the end of the year, by November, December, they would have conditioned him and worked with him and had their hands on him since for about 7 or 8 months at that point, that they would have been able to have gotten more out of him.
Yeah, Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, Inside the Birds podcast. The other guy, I guess, that they drafted last year was Dean. Got him in the 3rd round, and I would imagine that they anticipate a lot from him this year, right? I mean, is that fair to say that they think that he is going to be a every down player, even though he has no track record, basically? I mean, he only played 30 snaps last year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, listen, they felt very fortunate to be able to get him in the 3rd round where they got him. Granted, he was there for a reason, but still, for what his college productivity was.
What's the reason? Injury, right? There was like a
the
wonky...
reason was sort of a wear and tear and injury. He didn't have a good he didn't have a pro day. I think he was injured, so he didn't do everything at his pro day. There were question marks about there were a lot of, I know some people knew about the pec and everything that was out there, but I was told there were some other areas where, even though I don't think he missed the game at Georgia, but there was he's also undersized. I mean, he's very fast. There's no question about it, but he's not the biggest guy in the world either, in comparison to some other linebackers that came out. So when I say he's a 3rd round pick for a reason, I'm not trying to devalue him, but because the Eagles felt very fortunate to get him where they got him. But yes, the expectations are, after a year and having him and in the program and knowing the defense and their weight training and everything, that he's going to step in and be a good linebacker, a starting linebacker for them.
We talked about impact and getting on the field right away. Where do you feel about their defensive kind of end position? You got Sweat, you got Graham, you got Derek Barnett. People forget about him. And then I guess you got to kind of put Reddick in that conversation. I know he's a kind of an edge outside linebacker, but does it feel like there is a necessity to add more depth to that position, or do they count on Barnett as being a big part of this rotation?
No, I don't think you can count on that. And I do think that,
because you and I agreed last year that was kind of a okay signing as like a rotational whatever.
Yes, because we felt last year, especially not knowing what Reddick was going to do, but thinking he was going to be pretty good, that depth was still a concern. You had Brandon Graham coming off the Achilles injury, so it really left you with Sweat and Reddick as your starters, but this team has always had 4 deep at defensive end as far as productivity. And right now, you're looking at 3 deep with Barnett as a sort of question mark coming off the injury and not necessarily always being a productive player. And your youngest guy there is, I guess, Sweat. So, and he's up after 2 years. Reddick has 2 more years. So there's no question that if there's a great edge rusher available to them in the draft, that they will make that move if they like that guy. And it could even be the 1st round, because you just can't have enough guys, edge rushers, especially because you have some versatility with Sweat. You can move him inside. You can do that with Brandon Graham too. You can get an edge rusher on the field, even if he's a rookie.
Moshe, if Jalen Carter's on the board at 10, is that a home run? If they take him, if they don't have a red flag on him, if he's on the board at number 10, because he won't visit teams outside of 10. There has been some talk that maybe he's got some assurance from one of these teams. The Eagles said, hey, if you're at 10, we're going to take you. If he's there at 10, is Jalen Carter definitively the pick?
I can't tell you that. I mean, again, you just said if there are no red flags. Well, I'd have to know first if there are red flags. If not, if he clears every concern they might have, I would imagine he would be. But I also can't tell you, what if Howie Roseman gets a phone call just as he's about to, put the card in for Jalen Carter, and a team wants to move up and give a future first. And, we know that the Eagles don't have a pick for quite a while there on between day 2 and day 3. So I can't say slam dunk definitive yes, no matter what. I would have to know if he gets an offer there also before I sort of make that call.
Yeah. And the discussion between now and then, it's going to keep coming back to, I'm looking at, big boards. I'm a big mock draft fan. I like looking at the mock draft. I don't take them as Bible. One of my favorite things to do is watch people get angry about mock drafts. It's like, have a little fun in your life, man. It's just for fun. But big boards are different, and that's like where the Eagles. And I looked at a big board today that had Bijan Robinson number 3. So if it's your turn to pick, and you look at your big board after months and months and months of putting this thing together, and he's at the top of it, and it's your turn, do you just say, I put all this work in, and I'm not going to follow my board?
It's interesting. I'm going to do a little more homework on this year, because I always wonder how much, and it's kind of hard, like, to ask an evaluator or a GM to look in the mirror, right, and sort of confirm whatever biases you might have. But I do wonder if positional value creates a subconscious bias when ranking players.
So,
like,
in other words, are you asking, when I put my board together, my first player is this guy, but because we don't value that position, we're not putting him where he should be in the rankings? Or
a little bit, not like intentionally though, Mike, not like, oh, we have Bijan as the number 1, but he's a running back, so let's put our third ranked player who's a defensive end over him. It is just, can they look at a running back as they do their rankings and talk it out and do it and ever say that this guy is better than your best lineman, offensive lineman, or defensive lineman? Because at some point, what all teams have to do is judge player versus player when they play completely different positions and completely different sides of the ball. And you wonder if they have the inner capacity to say, this great studly defensive end is an amazing player, but not as good as that running back. And how does that reflect it in their rankings?
When teams put their boards together, I don't know that you know the answer to this, but maybe you do. I don't know. You're the Eagles. Is Bryce Young on your board? Is C.J. Stroud on their board?
100%. Absolutely.
Okay, so they put him on the board. So, okay. If he's on so theoretically, then, like you said, if you go best available player and C.J. Stroud fell for whatever reason, you then are saying this is the best player on our board.
Yeah, I mean, I think every GM would tell you that quarterback is and then maybe like tight end. There are a couple of positions that you consider the exception to the rule, where if you have a great one, you don't go ahead and draft another great one, because it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense from whether it's financial or roster building and things like that. So yeah, I think that's fair to say there's some exceptions to every rule.
Yeah. So it's an interesting, because I feel like this year, and it's funny, this morning, we were having a conversation. I was on Birds 365 with those guys this morning, and they were asking me about Bijan Robinson, and I look over at the television, and they're talking about the same thing as we're discussing, but for a different team. This kid Robinson is going to be in the conversation for every single team because of the position he plays, but every single team is going to have to ask the same question. Is he the best player on our board right now? Yes, he is. And what do we do?
I know it's a heck of a conundrum. Glad I don't have to make that decision.
Yeah, well, and I look at it like this, Moshe. Some teams, like the Giants, for instance, a couple of years ago, they drafted Saquon number 2. The Giants sucked at the time. You can't take a running back at number 2 when you stink. The Eagles have the luxury of maybe drafting outside the box with where their organization is right now. That's why I think it may be more in play than if the Eagles were 7-9. Or
I would agree with you there.
14-12 or whatever.
Yep. And plus, he's a guy who, if they were willing to take McCaffrey in 2017 because of all of the ways that he can impact the game, not just running the ball, then you would have to think that they would feel similarly about Bijan Robinson as well.
That's the big thing too. You just said, and Robinson can catch the ball too. You wonder what this offense would look like with a back who was a major part of the pass game. They have not had that back, even though they have backs that can do it. Gainwell, we think. Scott can do it. Sanders just never was that back for them that was a part of the pass game. What layer of offense does that have to have that little bink right to you and watch that guy in open space, breaking tackles, getting up the field, breaking tackles in the run game that they have?
Right. No, listen, man, I've thought about this a lot over the last 2 weeks, maybe longer. And every time I sort of have this conversation with you or somebody else, or just thinking about it myself, I always think about that other voice. It's like the two people sitting on the shoulder, right? Like for Howie, and then, someone telling Howie all the ways that Bijan Robinson can impact the game, and then the other person saying, yeah, but that a defensive end impacts a game and a season far more than a running back can. And you also know you've got good enough running backs with this offensive line and this quarterback. What about the guy who can get you 12 sacks, though? And then, we with this organization, and it's not a criticism. I think that they generally view it the right way. It's fair to say the defensive end, the pass rusher, the pocket pusher is going to be the guy that impacts the game and the season more than the running back.
He's Geoff Mosher from InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast. A lot of good conversation between now and the draft. DeCecco's here tomorrow. Kaplan's here on Friday. We have football at 4. They've got the Inside the Birds podcast, the Intel with Greg Cosell. You can check all his draft thoughts and conversation when you get up in the morning, pop on the pod on your way to work, and then listen to us right here during football at 4 on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Thank you, Moshe.
You got it. Good talk, Mike.